I guess, Dave, yeah, we're it's early 2021, and members of the YouFirst community and people who know us in Below the Line will have gotten a little blog from us, just about this idea of creating history for yourself in 2021. And this is something that I have come across, actually from you, and I just thought it'd be a nice little thing to put out there to members of the broader kind of Below the Line and YouFirst communities as a nice little exercise, not just for this year, because it is something that you can do kind of all the time, and it's also an idea about kind of writing history for yourself, So I just thought we could do a nice little front burner video as we kick off 2021 on this little kind of exercise that can be very powerful for people. So maybe the place to start is, what is it, and where did you come across it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a cocktail of a range of ideas I've picked up over the years, and I've just kept evolving it as the years have gone on. And it's probably got simpler for me, to be honest, as the years have gone on. And, if I go back a number of years ago in my own life, I spent a lot of time in sport. And I remember learning through coaches that, you had to sort of what you could see, you could believe, and you could achieve type of thing. So the power of our imagination to conceive of something and to imagine something was a formidable force, to be honest. And then I started coming across business coaches that started to use that technique, which is basically just working with the way our brain works, in terms of what type of life do we want to create, or what type of year do we want to have. And it's just a combination of that bits and pieces of that thinking that I've brought into my own life for the best part of 20 years. I think I started doing this about the early 2000s, started actively doing it. At the start, I started doing it at this time of the year, the start of a new year. But I've done it from time to time, at other points in the year, depending on what's going on, particularly if I made a big change or something like that in my life, typically around career or something like that. So the process and the way I work it is, the first step is but the first important thing is to write stuff down. So what I'm talking about here is, not somebody saying, well, I'll do that in my head. It's actually 10 times more powerful if you're actually prepared to commit it to paper, because I think we start to think a bit differently and more thoughtfully when we're actually, and we slow down a little bit when we're committing to paper, or it might be on your keyboard. So the first thing, I think a lovely thing to do is to stop and reflect on the extraordinary year that 2020 was, but reflect on it through the lens of successes. I remember going for a walk late last year with my mum, and I was asking her how she was doing, and she lives on her own, and she said, I'm doing great. And I asked her, like, how do you do that? And she said, at the end of every day, I spend 5 minutes reflecting on the successes I've had today, or all the good things that happened. And I said to her, have you ever had a day where you've not been able to think of any? And she said, never. And when I think of lots of the things that have happened in her life, I think that's pretty amazing. So it's about doing it for the year and just capturing those successes. And there's, it's sort of similar to gratitude in some ways, reminding ourselves, as however amazing or challenging or difficult 2020 was, there was probably a lot of successes peppered through it. And think about those successes as not necessarily the things that had big shining lights on them and big accolades around them, but whatever it is that you thought was a success. So it might have been a small habit changed, it might have been a goal achieved, it might have been a target achieved, it might have been a new way of living, it might have been an insight you got, it might have been a self-development, whatever. I just think it's lovely to just dwell on that for a while. And the second thing then, which I think is where the value of it has come for me, is what is the meaning of those successes? Why am I calling that a success? And that's when it starts to go a bit deeper. So for some people, being able to do some mindfulness, for example, every morning has been one of the biggest successes they've had in the year. Not because mindfulness is a big thing to do, although I think it's a pretty awesome thing to do. It's actually what it took in them to do it, to give themselves permission to actually do it, to learn how to stop. That in many ways, the meaning of that can be incredibly powerful. So I just use that as an example. Or it could be visiting your mother on a weekly basis, or phoning a friend to say, how are you doing? That can be big breakthrough stuff, and it could mean a lot to you. So I think extracting the meaning, that's the second thing. The third thing is take a note of what you've learned during 2020. I am imagining, and I know this for myself, that I've definitely learned more in 2020 than many, many years of my life, than most years of my life, as I've now reflected on it. And, you know, spending the Christmas just thinking from time to time about, wow, that was a hell of a year, but what have I actually learned? I mean, it's endless what I've learned. But I think we tend to learn from our reflections, not from our mistakes. So it's an opportunity to capture the learning by reflecting. So that's really important. And again, committed to paper. What are the learnings? The big ones, the small ones, doesn't matter. Play with that. That's a wonderful thing to do. And then one thing, you know, I wouldn't have a strong view on this, but it can be fun to do it, is to actually say, when I look back on the year I've just had, what were the priorities by which I lived my life? So, you know, my actions are, you know, I believe in this, like I believe in gravity, which is our actions are our priorities. So therefore, if I flip that around and say, well, what I was doing in 2020 was what I was giving priority to. So what were my priorities, whether I liked them or not? And everything else is an intention, if you like. So that's the sort of first thing. It's a way of just sort of capturing 2020 before we burst off into another glorious year. You know, have we actually captured all of the good stuff of 2020? And have we been able to do it in a way that we can organize that and it can be useful for us? So that's the first thing. And then to your question around sort of your history. So this idea of future history, it's a very common technique. The great thing about our brains is that our imagination can time travel, but our bodies can't. So like when we're doing mindfulness, we come back into our breathing. Why? To keep us here. But actually the opposite of that is, in our heads, we can go anywhere. So, you know, imagine we can take ourselves to the end of 2021. So we can now go to the 31st of December, 2021 now, and we can choose to be there now. We do this already. People listening to this call might be thinking, gosh, I'm going on holidays in the summer. And in a moment, you can be on your holidays. You can be there and you can have all of the feelings and the emotions of being on holidays and actually get some of the enjoyment of your holidays before you even go. So we all have that experience. That works both ways. You can also be awfulizing about what's coming up, and you can be living that too. So future history is very powerful. So where does this come from? It comes from a very simple routine, which is essentially priming. We're trying to prime ourselves for the year ahead. So if we're not conscious in our priming, the danger is we could sleepwalk in our priming, and we could end up getting a lot of what we don't want because we weren't conscious that we were drawing it in, if that makes sense. So we could be worried, we could be fear-driven, we could be awfulizing, and actually at the same time drawing that right in on top of us. So it's about getting conscious of that and actually saying, no, I'm going to get ahead of that, and I'm going to describe the year that I've had. So that's the first thing. Is number one is list down 2020. What are the priorities by which you want to live your life? What are your clear priorities? I'm not talking necessarily about goals. I'm not necessarily talking about plans. There just might be 2 or 3 big priorities, big themes that says this is what.
Sorry, this is 2021. You mean
2021? I beg your pardon. What are the priorities by which I want to live 2021 by? Absolutely. And you just put those out in front of you. And there could be themes. There could be themes around business, friendship, health. It doesn't really matter, whatever those themes are. And then what you do is, and this is the really important bit, and I love doing this because I think the brain functions differently when you do it. You sit in the 31st of December, 2021, and you write down in the present tense, which is all you can do, the year you've just had.
Okay.
So you say, you know, I have had a great holiday. This is, you know, and why was it great? We have built our business. I have changed my career. I have found a way to enjoy my career more. I have developed, you know, relationships in whatever. And you talk about it in that present affirmative sense, I beg your pardon. So when we do that, we speak in a much more committed language. So we don't say, I wish we could, or I hope to, or I'll try to do. When we speak in those terms, I believe there's sort of like a universe lying above us going, oh, Dave's just said he's going to try and do something. We don't need to do anything here because he's not committed yet. So we'll wait till he's committed and then we'll engage with them. So I think it's not till we're committed and we say, I have, I will, I am, it is, that the universe tends to cooperate with that. And actually, in truth, what's happening is we're really now beginning to act because it's impossible not to. So rule number one, write it out in the present tense as it has happened. And then go from there backwards. If you want to play with that and say, how did I get here actually? You could actually track backwards and say, the reason that happened really well was because I did, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's the real key of the exercise, to play with that. Now, when I do that, it typically turns out to be, you know, maximum a page. You know, it's I tend to not be too long-winded by it, but I know some of my and of our clients who've had some great fun with that and written out lots of stuff for themselves, and it's been really useful.
Yeah.
Now, the last thing I do, and I remember doing this in 2020 and having great fun with it, and I'm in the sort of, as I speak to you now, I'm in the sort of mode of finishing this for myself for this year, is I find an image or a few images that symbolize for me the year that I've had in 2021. Now, that's where it's very sort of visceral, because it's not about it making logical sense to a viewer. It's about the symbol meaning something to me.
Yeah.
So I remember in 2020, for example, my symbol was a photograph I took when I was on holidays of steps on a beach that symbolized for me the journey I was on, the place I was in, things I was trying to achieve. So I could talk to that image and really describe my 2020 year in that image. So that's very personal. But the reason I do that is I tend to stick that on my wall here, which should be in front of me, so that actually I can prime myself very easy. And a quick way for me to prime myself is I just look at the image. I don't necessarily need to read all the words all the time. Sometimes I have a bit of time and I'll sit and I'll just indulge in the words again, and it reminds me of where I'm at and what I'm doing. And what always surprises me, and at the same time doesn't surprise me, is how much of it's manifesting.
Yeah.
Because I'd finish by saying, because it only works. So that's what I do. It's, how long does that first of all, I have fun with that. Typically takes me maybe an hour, all told. I love doing it over the Christmas break, because I tend to just find I'm in a nice headspace to do it over the Christmas break. And if you're really up for it, for those of you in relationships with your spouse, it's a wonderful thing to do in relationships. It's a wonderful thing to do with your kids if you've got kids. It's a wonderful thing to do with friends if you've got friends. And David, you know, we've done some of this type of work when we're on our below the line retreats, and when we bring executives away, and it can be incredibly revealing in terms of people coming away going, I'm actually much clearer about where I'm going. Because I think what it does is it gives us a point of direction. Personally, I'm not into over planning. Now, look, I work in businesses. I understand the value of planning, but I think the value of a clear direction is more important. It's like, have we got a sense of direction, and by which we can navigate the yeses and nos, if you like, along the journey. Like, who would have thought 2020 would have turned out the way it did when we all set on the 1st of January last year? So we all had to navigate it, but on what basis did we navigate it, and where were we going in our navigation? That's what this exercise brings up for me as potentially really, well, it actually is really valuable, and it's been incredibly valuable during 2020 to stay the course, and to be true to, you know, who I am and where I'm trying to, what direction I'm trying to move in, notwithstanding the fact of, you know, the storm forces of a pandemic and lots of other things.
Yeah, fantastic, great. And for anyone who, well, look, you have the video now, you can watch back as many times as you want, but look out for the blog article on the website as well, because you'll be able to refer back to that when you go do the exercise. So I hope for everyone watching that they'll have a chance to do it. And I think one of the things you mentioned in your article is, you know, it seems to get more powerful for you the more you do it. So you're not doing it every, you know, week or whatever, but with each passing year, it seems to get more powerful for you.
Yeah, that's true. And, you know, I know I've got clients of mine who do this every month. They're, for a while, when they're really trying to get back on their tracks, on their journey, on their point of direction. And they find it incredibly useful to do it a little more frequently for a while. There's an analogy, David, if it helps, that I always use, and it's helpful for me, is I see myself as a sort of on a little boat on a big ocean. And, I look around the horizon lines and I just see water. And I see these horizon lines and I'm moving. So I tend to be always moving. So I'm doing stuff. The big question, though, is what direction am I moving in and why am I moving in that direction? And I think what this does is it helps me answer those two questions. And then my life can become more purposeful and more meaningful rather than just a series of achievements that has nothing at the end of it type of thing, or lacks a meaning in as I do it, is probably a better way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great.